Hello, friends. As you can see, this channel has gone to a new level. We've got Larry Johnson with us, a man who is a legend of the internet and especially the sphere of analysis. And we met at the St. Petersburg Economic Forum. And Larry, my sort of surprise for you today is that we're going to try to actually step a little bit away from the typical questions you always get about, especially U.S.-Russian relations and into some of the things happening internationally, and focus a little bit more on your background, having both worked in the CIA and the State Department. Because we were in St. Petersburg, we had some really interesting conversations. So
Sure.
let's start off with this. Okay, for you personally, what was your motivation to join the CIA? Was this like a thing where you saw some James Bond movies and you're like, wow, intelligence, it's so cool, this is something I want to do? And did the other people you work with, did they have the same motivation, or were they from a different universe?
I needed a job and wanted to eat, and my wife was telling me to get to work. So it was
Well, you
that
could
was,
work. My grandfather worked at a gas station. You could have fixed
yeah,
cars or done
yeah,
Walmart.
yeah. That was ultimately the decision. I'm always fascinated by these people that plan out their lives. That they're going to do this and this in order to step from this position to that position. And I approach life more like somebody playing jazz on a saxophone. It's a lot of improvisation, which is good and bad. I've been fortunate because the nature of my life, how I sort of stumbled into CIA, because people look at my career prior to CIA and they say, oh, you were definitely CIA. So in 1978, I headed up a community development project with my wife in Honduras. And it was a combination of a missionary program, and she ran a health clinic, set up 3 rural clinics. I was teaching farmers how to do contour farming. Believe it or not, in Central America, these guys, their normal method was to burn off the side of a mountain. They'd plant corn, they'd get one harvest, and they didn't even really plant corn in rows. And if you know anything about corn, it's got to be in rows to cross fertilize itself.
So what did they do? Just kind of like throw old corn kernels everywhere and just see what happens?
No, they're a little more systematic. They had a stick in hand. It was called a guante, and they would jab a hole in the ground to the right, a hole in the ground to the left, throw in some grains of corn, step forward. So these things would be about 2 to 3 feet apart, and that's really too far with corn. And then at the end of when they'd harvest, then would come the rains, and all the topsoil would get washed down to the bottom of the mountain. So I introduced this contour farming. You actually dug in canals, irrigation canals up the side of the mountain. It increased their corn production 600% the first year. So I came out of that, then went back, was working on a PhD at American University. I was asked by a church organization to go to Argentina to supervise the construction of a church, not because I knew anything about construction, but because I spoke Spanish. And I walked into Argentina during the height of its hyperinflation in 1984. Enjoyed the time there. Came back, and it was when I got back, looked around, needed a job, and CIA was advertising.
They
So
advertised.
Oh yeah.
Really?
Oh yeah.
And what was that advertisement like? Like, what was how were they trying to hook people in? Or was it literally just CIA salary position? Or was it
Well, they didn't offer salary or position in the ad. They just, hey, a chance to be involved with U.S. national security and making a difference in the world, that kind of thing.
Okay.
You go in, you take a test. It's like this scholastic aptitude test on steroids. Then you take a psychological test, the Myers-Briggs personality indicator. Then, those that pass that first level of review, then they call you in for interviews. And I was interviewed both in the Directorate of Operations and in the Directorate of Intelligence. And it was, I had little interest going overseas at that time, so I sort of shied away from committing to go into the DI. Then medical exam, polygraph. You get through all that, and then you get a job offer.
Polygraph, really?
Oh yeah, oh yeah.
And What exactly were they trying to dig out the truth from you? Like, were any
Well,
of the
you just
questions really scathing, or was it just kind of like, yes, my name really is Larry Johnson, or stuff like
yeah,
that?
it'd be like, back then the questions were, do you enjoy sucking a man's cock?
Oh, well, nowadays that's a bonus. That's
And
a step in
so
the right direction.
if you said no, does that
Oh,
imply you did, but you didn't enjoy it, or
yeah, like the
So this
classic
is
"Do you enjoy beating your wife?" question. That
yeah,
one,
yeah.
yeah.
So this is back when
Whoa.
they were asking the lifestyle questions to quote read out homosexuals. What's really sort of funny about that, and it's this is relevant to Russia. The head of the Soviet section on the Directorate of Operations, the guy who's in charge of operations, um, he was a closeted homosexual. We found out later.
Hmm.
He served as chief of station in Moscow. I've talked to my friend Bob Bear, and Bear had actually gotten even more dirt on this guy. Uh, but apparently, when he was in Moscow, he used to travel around with the son of the U.S. naval attaché, and they'd share a hotel room.
Ooh.
So yeah,
Ooh.
we're talking a level of perversion that way. What made it? It's one thing if it's out in the open, you admit to it, but when you cover it up and then you're firing people who pass, fail the poly on that, as an example.
Yeah.
It was part of the problem of the CIA. So you're right. Today they probably reward you if you say, "Oh yeah, I'm not sure what sex I am, and I
Hmm.
enjoy having sexual congress with animals." Oh,
Yeah.
great! So you're an animal lover. Good.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. So,
And
but it got into the CIA, and I was accepted into what they call the career trainee program.
mhm.
Previously, that program had been restricted to only case officers, people who are going to be trained to go overseas to recruit spies. This was an initiative undertaken by then Bobby Gates,
Mhm.
and it was designed to bring all four directorates. At the time, there were four directorates at the CIA: admin, uh, technical operations, what they called science and technology, analysis, and operations. And there were approximately 12 to 13 people from each of those directorates in the class.
Mhm.
So I was in class, for example, with Valerie Plame, who later came to fame in the whole scandal surrounding the war in Iraq.
Oh,
Actually,
that's right. Yeah.
Steve Hall, who was a CIA station chief in Moscow, and Steve's sort of a classic case of the problems of the CIA. He got into the CIA because his dad was a CIA officer. So it
Mhm.
was like the friends and family program. And,
Oh, we say
and
a classic case. You mean that there's sort of like a lot of nepotism within the organization?
oh my God. Yeah, it makes, they say incest is the game the whole family can play. This was,
Wow.
this is, the CIA is a very incestuous outfit when it comes to that. So,
And does that
um,
kind of paint the picture? Because I also wanted to ask you later on, but let's do it now. Like, so who are these other people who work in the CIA? Is there like a particular type of person? Like, for example, right? I used to deliver ventilation and pipes to a lot of pipe fitters, and generally, pipe fitters are a pretty manly bunch. I mean, all these dudes are really gruff, smoking, drinking, hard working kind of guys, right? Although there are individuals, they kind of have this overall kind of look to them. Is there such a thing for the CIA? Like, is there a sort of typical CIA guy or type of
uh,
person?
they do select on personality indicators. So the analysts largely are what they are people who are sort of introverted. They're
Oh,
not extroverts. They're they are analytical in their thinking. The best way, look, the best way I described it, because I witnessed this, uh, you could tell if somebody was from the Directorate of Intelligence or the Directorate of Operations by
hmm.
following them to the bathroom and watching what they did. So
Hmm.
on the analytical side of the house in the morning, after a morning meeting, you'd see the analysts trooping down to the bathroom,
Dead
and the men,
silence.
no, well, they'd get into the bathroom and they'd floss and brush, and
Ah.
then Then if they had to, urinate, they would go into a stall, close the stall, and take a piss.
Yeah.
DO side, they'd be walking in. They're not brushing their teeth. They're not flossing. They're standing at the urinal with their dick in hand, talking to the guy. Hey, man, how you doing? That kind of difference. They're just completely different personalities. So the DO generally back then encouraged, people who were good at building rapport, building relationships with people. Yet, ironically, they kept hiring and selecting some people like, this guy I described as the head of the Soviet operations back then. His name started with a B. God, there was nothing warm, fuzzy, or likable about him. He was a prick. Just completely disgusting in terms of his interactions with people. So you got to wonder how he was an effective, quote, spy, because to be a good spy, as far as somebody that's going to recruit foreigners to give you information that they're not supposed to give you, you got to have a bit of a salesman.
Well, yeah, you got to be likable, basically.
Yeah. Because if you don't like me, man, you're not going to want to interact with me at all. So it's like, trying to be congenial. Now, I had the personality type that they liked on the DO, oh my God, it scared the shit out of them over on the DI. The director of intelligence, they were like, because I was too hot of a personality for them. But, I sort of liked, I view analysis like problem solving a puzzle. Yeah. I like that intellectual challenge.
Well, you said you had too hot of a personality. Do you mean you were like argumentative or what?
No, I'd be open and ask questions that you probably, someone who's more savvy in terms of, keeping a low profile to keep their mouth shut. I got into at the end of my first year, after I came out of the career trainee program, started work as an analyst, and within 6 months, the director of the Office of Africa and Latin America Intelligence, ALA they called it at the time. So this guy sat over all the analysts who covered Africa and Latin America. A guy named John Allen. John Allen called us to his office, all the new analysts, and there were about 15, 16 new analysts that had joined the Africa and the Latin American offices in the previous year. And he starts off, he goes, "Hey, I understand that there are some morale problems, that, people aren't happy, and I'd like to get to the bottom of it." Well, I was, 31 at the time. I should have known better. I was dumb enough to think, oh, he's genuine. He wants to know. I'll tell him, because I knew. And I said, well, John, I can tell you what the problem is. The problem is basically the analysts don't feel like they get any respect, at least here at Africa Latin America Division. And let me give you an example. 2 years ago, the folks in the Middle East Division, their boss got a $25,000 cash award. And he took that $25,000 cash award and he threw a party for his analysts as a way of saying thank you to the analysts. I said, whereas your predecessor, a guy named Rick Stakem, and we called him Rick Rapem, Rapem Stakem.
Wow.
Yeah, it was not meant as a term of endearment.
No, I would say not.
Yeah. I said, yeah, your buddy Stakem got a cash award for the quality of the analysis, and he went out and bought himself a Lexus. I said, that's the problem.
Oh.
John Allen turned the color of my headset red, bright red, and he said, everybody out of the room but you. You stay. So he was upset. And then he began to chew my ass for, how dare you? Who are you to judge? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, right then I learned that when they say, hey, we got a problem with morale, we'd like to know what it is, they don't have a damn bit of interest in fixing it.
No, that's just some checkbox they have to do. Yeah. Ask about morale, check.
They want you to blow some smoke up their ass.
Yeah.
And I was not good at blowing smoke up ass. I was not good at ass kissing. I could never find a big enough box of chapstick to put on my lips.
Huh.
And so that that made me a bit of a I was sort of a stone in the shoe of the intelligence
Mm-hmm.
community there.
No.
I remember once at a warning meeting. So the National Intelligence Officer for Latin America would call together Latin American analysts, senior analysts, to say, okay, what are the issues? What are the problems? And so I was delivering, since I was a senior regional analyst, and I started talking about the contras in the war with Nicaragua. And I said, well, the contras, and he goes, stop right there. Guy named Bob Vickers. And I go, what? He goes, don't say contras. You must say democratic national resistance.
Oh.
And I went, but the president calls them the contras. And he goes, yeah, but he's the president. So, I mean, I just was not good at putting up with that kind of bullshit.
Yeah.
And it was 2 years later, a year later, in 1989, when I got a new branch chief, Mary McCarthy. She later got fired for leaking information to the press, which is ironic.
In like the cool Julian Assange way, or in some
No,
sort
no.
of corrupt way?
No, more playing the politics game.
I see. Okay.
But she came out of Africa, and she knew Africa, and they made her the branch chief for the Central American branch. She didn't know a thing about Central America, never lived there, didn't speak the language, had no academic studies related to that. Meanwhile, I had lived in Honduras, I'd lived in Guatemala, and so I had experience I had regional experience. I spoke the language, and back then, this was in the Stone Age. So every morning when I'd come in, there'd be a stack of paper about this thick of the message traffic that came in overnight. When I refer to message traffic or cable traffic, these were communications that would be communications from the Secretary of State to to say the embassy in Tegucigalpa or the embassy in Guatemala City, or there would be communications from those embassies back to State Department. There would be intelligence reports created by the Defense Intelligence Agency, both from their agents in the field as well as their analysts back at headquarters. There would be documents from the National Security Agency, various classifications of different kinds of intercepted communications overnight, and then there'd be CIA messages. So I had to go through all of that every morning.
Oh man, that sounds
basically
like an impossible task.
It's possible, but you just have to recognize you're doing a lot of skimming and scanning without reading. You have to try to quickly identify what's important, what's not important. Then you get ready, so I'd get in by 7:15, have to have this all ready to go by 8. We'd have our morning meeting at 8. And in that morning meeting, you go in and talk about what happened overnight, and what would be a possible item that you'd consider writing for the Presidential Daily Brief or for the National Intelligence Daily. Say, oh, here's an issue, this needs to be addressed. And so you go into that morning meeting, then my branch chief would, after that meeting, he'd go up to the office meeting and he'd pass on what we just said.
Yeah.
And then he'd come back from that meeting and say, okay, yeah, they want to do that, or no, go work on something else.
Well, here's a philosophical question. I don't mean to be a jerk here, but to what extent did the president then actually really seriously look at information related to Guatemala on like a daily basis? Like
not on a daily basis. No. It would only be if the item got picked up and was put into the Presidential Daily Brief. Now, what was fascinating about what I learned about myself is I was in a rare breed of analysts. Most analysts in their career are going to be lucky to get into the president, during a 20-year career. If they're into the Presidential Daily Brief 20 or 30 times, they're lucky. Mm-hmm. I was writing for it about twice a week, 2 to 3 times a week. So I had a high profile. My stuff was getting in there. What happened with this Mary McCarthy, though, the front office said, hey, we'd like you to pull out a select group of cables, the things you think are most important for us to read every day, and get it to the front office. So I did that. I'd pull it out, put it in the package, send it up to the front office. Well, unbeknownst to me, Mary was doing the same thing, except she didn't know what the hell she was looking at. So she was going through and pulling out. There was a tendency back then for the Defense Intelligence Agency to put out the most outlandish cables, like the world's going to end tomorrow. That kind of stuff. Oh my God, that's important intelligence. Let's put that up front. Whereas I'd look at it and go, that's bullshit.
And they did that to do what? To like, kind of like get a gold star from their bosses?
Yeah. Sometimes I think they were simply producing reports because they had a quota to meet, and if they didn't meet that quota, they would get dinged on their performance appraisal report. So Mary ended up, she was sending up a completely different selection of messages to the front office. So about a month passed, and it was time for the promotion. And so the way they do promotions is they meet, the senior managers meet, they review your performance, your work. It's called a performance appraisal report, a PAR, and then they, make a decision. So, at that point, I was in the top 10% of analysts in terms of producing current intelligence. I was considered an excellent briefer. I had written a hardcover. I had checked all the boxes that you need to check to get promoted. And so I went in to sit down with the officer was a woman by the name of Carmen Medina. Karma always reminded me a little bit of, like, you remember that character in Star Wars, Jabba the Hutt?
Oh, yeah, of course, the big kind of slug guy.
Yeah, back then she looked a little bit like him.
Wow.
So I get in there and she goes, well, you're not getting promoted. We've reviewed your work and we have questions we question the integrity of your analysis. And I went, it was that cartoon Roger Rabbit where the eyes bulge out of the head.
Oh, yeah.
Mouth open, and steam coming out of my ears. And it was like, what the hell? Well, it turned out that they had been getting Mary's documents and my documents, and they recognized there was a discrepancy. Now, any sane manager, any manager with two basic brain cells, on the first day they got discrepancies, and maybe the second day, they would call the analyst and the manager together and go, basically, what the fuck? Why are these different? And would have given you a chance to explain. And I would have had to figure out a diplomatic way, say, she's ignorant, doesn't know what she's talking about. Yeah. She's pulling stuff out of her ass. And, they didn't do that. So at that point, I said, I'm not putting up with this crap anymore. I'm going to get out of here.
That's really insulting. It is really insulting.
It is. And people think at that point, oh, well, you're just disgruntled. Well, I could show you. I've got the 2 exceptional performance awards hanging on my wall. So my last year at CIA, they thought I was a good enough analyst that they gave me 2 exceptional performance awards.
Yeah.
They wouldn't promote me, but by God, I was considered exceptional. Oh, yeah. And I got 2 of those in a 6-month period.
Although today you're the guest, but I can say at one particular Russian media organization, I had the best material they were producing with the most views. And the person who was interviewing was like, you're doing bad. I'm like, how? I get way more views than anything else we're producing. Yeah, but it's bad. It's bad because I think it's bad, regardless of what the statistics you show me. So I've been there too, man. I feel your pain. But one overall question is, when you were working there during that time, do you think what you were doing actually benefited, U.S. security? Like you were actually working towards the good of the United States, or maybe a little bit of good?
No, I think it was largely a charade.
Oh,
because we're checking a box. This way they could see it, because they were going to do what they were going to do. Oh. It's like it didn't really matter what the intelligence said. They had decided on the policy, and by God, they were going to follow the policy. So this was during the last 2 years of the Reagan administration, 86 to 88, and then the first 2 years of the Bush administration. Well, actually, I left in '89, so I lasted through the first 9 months of the Bush administration before I went to State Department. But I was I was directly involved one day when we were down briefing members of Congress. This is primarily members of the House of Representatives on, were the Sandinistas going to invade Honduras? What were the prospects for the war? What was Honduras going to do? And right in the middle of the meeting, we got this word from headquarters that the Sandinistas had invaded Honduras and were overrunning the Contra positions. It was presented like the Contras are at the Alamo, the Mexicans coming over the wall, Jim Bowie's being killed, Davy Crockett's being killed. It was terrible. And and I was there myself, the Nicaraguan military analyst, a guy named John, and good old another John from the DO, guy named John Armstrong, who was the sort of the ops guy for the Central American Task Force. And so as we got back in the car, Armstrong starts berating us, "You analysts!" It was they would call us analysts as opposed to analysts.
Gotcha.
As their way to be insulting. This is your fault. This wouldn't have happened without you. You've blaming us that somehow we had undermined the Contra effort by what we were writing up in Washington D.C. I mean, even to say something that stupid just shows you what a clown the guy was. Get back to headquarters and finally check the intelligence. Well, the actual intelligence was based on an NSA intercept, a communication intercept. And it said that a Sandinista patrol had come in contact with the Contras 15 kilometers from the base. Well, that's a lot different than saying the Sandinista battalion was overrunning the base.
Very different.
And then when you realize they were in this part of Honduras known as the Bocay, which is triple canopy jungle. I mean, my God, you could put 2 divisions worth of soldiers. You'd have 20,000 guys tramping around in the woods out there, and you wouldn't see each other. They'd be lost.
Well, yeah, so what you're saying, it's like 15 kilometers, but you can't even walk at top speed.
Yeah,
you're like one step at a time. Gotcha.
Exactly. So by this point, we were being pressed to write something, and then I got a call from CIA State Department officer, a guy named Steve Weshy. And Steve was the attaché to Elliott Abrams at the time. And he goes, "Okay, yeah, I need to get the latest dump because Elliott's writing the speech for the president. The president's going to go out and tell members of Congress, 'I told you so,' and we're going to activate and send the 82nd Airborne." I went, "Well, Steve, that's not what happened." He goes, "What?" And so I read him the actual intelligence, what was said, and he goes, "Oh shit, I got to tell Elliott." Well. Whatever he told Elliott didn't, pass muster.
Didn't change anything.
So Reagan went ahead and made a speech, and "I told you so that the Sandinistas were going to do this," and ignoring all the U.S. provocations that were behind the scenes from a CIA standpoint. And they activated the 82nd Airborne and deployed them to Honduras. To do what? They didn't know. It was a show of force against the Sandinistas. And so, those kinds of experiences, I saw how policy was actually made. I saw how policy ignored the intelligence. I saw how lies were fed to the American public. And, I was in no position to get on television and say, "Hey, this is all bullshit. You're being lied to."
And so what can we do to fix this? Let's just say in the United States, what should intelligence actually look like? Or no matter what we do, eventually it's all going to boil down to some sort of hierarchy and some butt kissing, and that's just sort of the nature of the game.
Yeah,
or is there a way to fix it?
There is a way to fix it, but I don't think there's the political will to fix it. The first step is the CIA must be divorced from clandestine operations, covert operations. And what do I mean by that? That, like the war, putting together and running the war in Nicaragua, or putting together and running the war in Ukraine, putting together and running a secret war against the Viet Cong in Vietnam. Because what happens is Once the directorate of operations gets turned on to carrying out one of these action missions, the intelligence collection takes a back seat. It's no longer the priority. And the analysts become captive, potentially captive to the operation.
Mm-hmm.
So, like what we ran into with the Central American Task Force, and I was fortunate. I had actually worked on the Central American Task Force. This is what they call a reports officer. So I knew what the actual intelligence was coming in over there, and I knew how they were trying to manipulate the analysts by limiting the actual information they would get or deliberately misleading them. As an example, the analysts would get a report saying, oh, the Contras carried out an attack on Friday against the Sandinista battalion, and they hit this, and they destroyed this much, and they killed this many. Well, what I found out through my friends back over on the other side was that this character, John Armstrong, he would write up an operations order for the Contra units. Mm-hmm. He would send that operations order, and that operations order would tell the Contras, you're going to attack on this day, this time, this place. This is what you're going to carry for weapons. This is your mission. This is what your objective is. Mm-hmm. And then on the date that it was supposed to take place, Armstrong would have that issued as an intelligence report as if it was coming back from the conference. But it hadn't. But he was putting it out like it had happened. So here we are as analysts having to say, well, according to this source.
And, so it's like they're writing the orders are executed, and then they report on it as if it just sort of happened on its own.
Yeah.
To cover it. Yeah. Amazing.
Yeah. Wow. So it was just bullshit.
Now,
but my point is, when you have these kinds of clandestine activities dominating and driving the CIA, then it's going to corrupt the analysis. Mm. What the CIA should be, in my view, is we should have guys and gals who are good at going overseas, building rapport, and recruiting foreigners to give us information they shouldn't. Mm-hmm. Just like Russia has case officers, mm-hmm. male and female, who do the same thing, and they're very good at it. Why? Because you want to know what the other side's really thinking. Mm-hmm. Now, actually, my radical proposal is let's dispense with all the clandestine nonsense. Let's be upfront and say, okay, look, we're going to send CIA officer to sit in the Kremlin and be part of Vladimir Putin's staff, and we're going to have a Russian SVR officer come to Washington, D.C. and sit at the White House and Biden's staff. Mm. And that way they're going to have full access to report what's going on. That way either side's going to know with some degree of certainty, hey, okay, the other's not getting ready to kill me. Because what we got right now is I'm not sure that either side has any real decent sources. If anybody has good sources, it's probably the Russians have better sources on the U.S. side than the U.S. has on the Russian side. And so when you're dealing with, we don't know, you always have to assume the worst. And then all these assumptions are going to get you into trouble. So,
yeah, and one other thing that I have to tell you is no matter how much the Russian side complains, especially in their media, about like how the Americans don't understand them or stuff like that, they really don't understand the West. I give a lot of interviews about it, and it's kind of like, Larry, it's kind of like when people discuss the difference between men and women. It's sort of like you can try as hard as we want, but women, you can only understand them to some degree, or at least theoretically, and I think even the Russians really don't. So, I don't know. Sometimes people always put it that, like, maybe you've met him before, Mr. Martyanov always says that Americans, the in Defense Department, are highly uncultured people, right?
Yeah.
But to be honest, the Russians are more cultured, but they still don't get the West. So,
and that's why it's important to have people that have some depth into culture and language. It's indispensable. I mean, that's why. Again, I don't speak Russian. I speak about 6-7 words, pasiva, but beyond that, my language is Spanish. I've lived in a variety of Latino cultures, and they're all different. You know, Mexicans are not the same as Hondurans, not the same as Guatemalans, not the same as Salvadorans, not the same. Yeah, they all speak Spanish,
Yeah.
but they sure have different cultural heritages and outlooks and ways of thinking.
Yeah.
But it's important to understand that
Yeah.
and to recognize those kinds of nuances.
Now,
And
one thing that is, I kind of want to ask you a little bit. I don't know if you know the answer to this question, but like then, so the Russia has like the FSB. I forget what the Chinese equivalent is, but are they also carrying out? Do they work in a similar, also bizarre, self-feeding mechanism manner like the CIA does? It's just that Russia's a poorer country, or do they have a different sort of method of operation? Because you don't really hear about them doing this kind of stuff all over the world, or is it just the fact that Russia just doesn't have the money?
Well, as I recall, isn't FSBs basically like the FBI? They're domestic. Their focus is on domestic terrorism, domestic surveillance, domestic criminal activity. They're not the foreign element, is my understanding, sort of like the successor to the KGB is the SVR.
Oh, yeah, maybe you're right. Yeah.
Yeah. So the SVR is a far more professional organization than the CIA. Bob Baer, a friend of mine, and I just did an interview with him on a new channel I've called Countercurrents. He wrote a book called The Fourth Man. And basically this was a story of the CIA, that there's still evidence pointing to a very high-level CIA official that was an asset of what had been then the Soviet Union and then became Russia. So, and the guy that Bob puts his finger on is a fellow named Paul Redman, who's now long retired. Redman insists, "Oh no, I was not a Soviet spy." It's not so much the story of why Redman is or is not potentially the fourth man. When you read Bob's book, what you get is great insight into just how screwed up the CIA is from a management standpoint. Okay, and how it was that there, in many respects, the KGB and then the SVR had the CIA chasing its own ass like a dog chasing its tail.
Like a storm of disinformation to make them chase after nonsense.
Yeah, and just the sophistication of the operations that the Russians and their predecessors, the Soviets, ran. This goes back as an example. One of the biggest influences in the early days of the CIA was a former Nazi SS officer by the name of Reinhard Gehlen. And Gehlen was brought in because he was the head of intelligence for the Wehrmacht. Well, his primary source was a guy in Sofia, Bulgaria, turned out was a Jew.
Oh.
And years later, it turned out that this Jew was actually controlled by the NKVD back then, which was the Soviet intelligence organization that preceded the KGB. So,
wow,
the Soviets were very sophisticated in their use of this deceiving Gehlen, and Gehlen, though, got accepted initially by CIA, by several officers in the CIA, as having all the true insight about how bad the Soviet Union was, and that Stalin was going to conquer the world, and he had this secret plan. And Gehlen was just he was a liar, and had been deceived. But my point is, it goes back that far. Yeah. So when you look at the United States always just like to portray the Soviets as crude, as unsophisticated.
Oh yeah.
Wearing crappy clothing, and to this day we still persist with that kind of arrogant nonsense. And I've even seen, unrelated to the intelligence world and the world of spies, This there's one commentator. I've erased his name from my brain. He's Peter Zahan. That's his name.
Mm-hmm.
Zahan's a moron because he's out there saying, "Oh, the Russian space program is suffering from inadequacies and backwardness," and you know, he's out there talking about how bad the Russian space program is.
Mm.
At the very time that the United States still relies
on Russian materials, yeah.
Yeah, they rely on Russia to get their materials and personnel back and forth from the space station. And it looks like right now we got 2 astronauts stranded at the space station. U.S. can't get them back, so it's either going to be up to Elon Musk or the Russians to haul their sorry asses back. Oh. So, but this is an example of this kind of arrogance. Oh, we're better than them, and etc.
Yeah, or that only the Russians are corrupt. Military-industrial complex. Yeah, but anyways, Larry, I understand that you have an incredibly busy schedule, and as someone who already gave 3 interviews today, I know what it's like to give a lot of interviews, and it's very tiring. So I have one final question. We met at the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum, and as someone who understands, you understand very well the concept of, let's just say, influence and soft power. Do you think that that event and other events like it really accomplish a lot? Is this a really potent? Yeah. Oh, really? Good.
Yeah, no, I think it's remarkable. It was, it's stunning that when, first of all, I look at it just from the organization standpoint. I mean, this is not like some little kid has his mom make him a pitcher of lemonade and goes sets up a lemonade stand to sell it on the street. Okay.
Yeah.
This was a very complex planning. In fact, I'm sure the planning for next year's event has already started.
Yeah.
Because the structure is massive. They had the logistics involved to make sure that you got enough food for 25,000 people on a daily basis. Mm-hmm. To ensure you've got the electrical power, that the internet system works, that the putting together the schedule where you've got literally 20, 30 different meetings going on every hour in different places. Mm-hmm. Just looking at those organizational details, it was first class. Yeah. Compounded by the fact that you had to get a COVID test before you could even get into the place. Mm-hmm. And for them to do COVID tests, the PCR tests, and then get them processed so that people can get in, that's remarkable.
Yeah. It was also weird because that's the only place in Russia where PCR tests are still done. Only that event. It's very bizarre. But anyways, that's a topic for another day.
Well, yeah. And, but part of the reason is you had people from 136 countries there. Mm-hmm. And with 25,000 people. And what was so noteworthy is virtually nobody from the West. I got to be there as a minority. There are just a few of us Americans. Scott Bennett was there. We could call Dimitri Simes Jr. an American because he was born in America and
no accent when he talks, man. He's one of us.
Went to school, but he's back in his native, the homeland of his parents. Mm-hmm. That was influential because the people from these other countries, they come away recognizing they had a chance to talk, to interact, and a lot of the discussion was focused on BRICS. What's next? Mm-hmm. And the future of BRICS. So this is moving in a direction, and the West, instead of being there to try to have an influence, trying to have a voice, a presence, shunned it.
Yeah,
which is typical. Again, go back to the arrogance factor we talked about earlier.
Yeah, but Americans showed up nonetheless. Anyways, Larry Johnson, I won't keep you anymore. I know you got a million things to do. Very much appreciate your time, and I hope to see you on the channel. And I think you offered for me to go on your Sonar 21, right?
Yes,
we'll look forward to that, and we'll work out the details. Anyways, friends, Tim Kirby Russia, signing out.